Mike McCool here in the Royal Examiner studio, and with me today is Lance Allen. Lance is running for Virginia Senate.
That is correct.
That election is coming up this year?
Yeah,
next year.
June 20th is the primary. Well, it is now this year. Finally, it's this year.
Finally. It seems like we've been talking about this for
forever.
A couple of years.
Yes, June the 20th this year is the primary, and then obviously November is the general.
Yeah, so we have quite a few people running. This is for that new district that we have, correct?
Yeah, so because of the census, which we all kind of found out about, they redrew the lines, and that was a big hubbub because of the newly appointed district committees, and then it went to the Supreme Court. And luckily, and I think, I say fortunately, I think that a lot of the gerrymandering was gone, and I think that the new first district, we're in the first district now, which was what they call it, it's square, man. It's 4 counties. It's Shenandoah, Warren, Clarke, and Frederick, and the City of Winchester.
Right.
It's a great district.
Right. And you know, one thing good about that is we're getting some fresh blood, so to speak, in the House and the Senate, because it's just it's a little
Yeah.
There weren't any, I would say, incumbents in that area to speak of.
Yeah, so so the 2 senators were drawn out. Obenchain was drawn out of Warren County and Shenandoah, and then Jill Vogel was drawn out of Frederick County and Clarke. So yeah, I think that's great. I think you also see a lot of turnover in the House and the Senate. I'm a term limit kind of guy. As a matter of fact, when you talk to me today, you'll hear me say multiple times, I'm only seeking 2 terms. Right. After that, please, somebody kick me out. But yeah, I think that that's a good thing, and it really is helpful, I think, that to find out that there were people who moved because they wanted to stay in. So they picked their house up and they moved into a winning district. I think a lot of people are not doing this time around, and I applaud that. The times change, people change, let some new blood in there. Let's go try to get some new things done.
So why do you want to be a senator in Virginia?
Oh, I don't.
That's the good answer.
Yeah, no, I have to be honest with you. People ask me all the time. I don't. My wife and I have talked about it, many times. And this race in particular, I ran for lieutenant governor, as you know, in 21. And that race was nice. I was friends with everyone. Tim Hugo and Glenn Davis and I were all running against each other, and we would go have dinner afterwards. Or we'd be at a debate, and I'd be in one room, and they'd be in another room, because it was all virtual then. Right. So we'd all be at the same locations, and we would just be in different rooms, and then we'd come out and just laugh with each other. This race is a lot nastier. The more people that have come into this race, I've found the nastier the politics in it have gotten. I don't have a lot for that. My wife, who is my guiding light in all of this, if I ever lose her support, that's when I'll decide it's good. But she reminds me that for those 2 reasons, it's okay for me to keep running. The fact that I don't want to be a state senator, I just want to go get some things done. And the fact that I realize that it's an uphill battle and that it's nasty, and that weighs on my conscience. Do I want to crawl in the dirt with some of these folks? She says those are good things. And so, it keeps me up at night sometimes, but that's okay. So, but to answer the question, why am I running? I think the question probably for me is a little bit better answered this way. There are a lot of things that we can do right now in the state of Virginia, and there are people have made a lot of promises. I mean, when the House turned over and when we got all 3 statewide offices, there were a lot of promises made. Now, don't get me wrong, Terry McAuliffe didn't do the Democrats any favor by saying parents don't belong in schools, right? Don't get me wrong. But on the Republican side, there were also a lot of promises made about what we were going to do to make the Commonwealth better. And I would argue 2 sessions later, we've still got a long runway. And so I'm running to do a very specific set of things, and when you ask me about them, I'll be happy to tell you about them. But I want to do those things. I'm seeking 2 terms. I'm offering to donate my paycheck every chance I get it to some group that I've either worked with or that I know of here in the district that I think could use that money better than I can. And so that's what we're doing. That's why I'm running. And to be honest, I think it should be that way. I think if we can set an example of you can do this, accomplish great things, and then not have to worry about building a career as a politician, I don't know. If we can set that example and it's a good one, then I think it's worth the effort.
I think that's what our first founders did. Wasn't that right? It's kind of how they operated. Get in, get out, and move on, right?
Yeah, there were some, and I think that this is the exception, not the rule. And what I mean by that is there were many of our founding fathers who stepped into the plate and knew that the people would give them too much. Right. George Washington was one of those. He knew that they're gonna, as soon as they make me president, they're gonna make me king. They want to make me king, and so he fought with that. And so a lot of them chose to purposefully put limits.
Right.
And I applaud that. Right. But again, I don't want to knock our system of government. The exception, not the rule. You have lifelong people who have devoted their life to serving this country. John Adams is a great example. He's someone that I admire, who spent his entire life in politics. Even after he was president, he went right back. And, that's some dedication. But all too often, I think that kind of servitude has a very, especially in today's world, with the amount of money and power that lives on Capitol Hill and within the capitals of the states, it just all too often has a tendency to corrupt and tempt. And I'm one of those people who just likes to lay it out up front and put the limits on my temptation before it can ever be more than that.
Right. Now they can hold you, they go back, years from now. Now, you said you were only going to do that. So, what are you going to do on first? You have some of these things, so we'll go back to day one issues. So
yes.
Let's talk about those.
So when I ran for lieutenant governor, we put together a policy book that I think was probably about 77 pages. All right. It was really good. Don't get me wrong.
Like it's never going to end.
Right. It was really good. And we spent a lot of time doing it. And I think that you should, because people want to know that you understand the issues, especially across the Commonwealth, right? They want to understand that you know what you're talking about. The state Senate race, lesson learned, all right? No one's going to take the time to read that much policy.
Right.
So we got to reel it back a little bit and make sure that people understand what we're going to do, what our actions are going to be on the first day. So this time around, we made a much shorter book, and actually the policy only takes up a page. And it tells you what I'm going to do on day one. So a couple of the things that I really want to do are universal school choice. You asked me why I'm running. Let me give you a couple of examples. So I am one of those people who believes in school choice. A lot of people, when you say school choice to them, will say, we need to bankrupt the public school system. People who talk like that don't understand the nuances of the issue. So I don't know what your affiliation is, but if I were to tell you that today, I would hope you would push back on me a little bit and say, Lance, that's wrong,
yes.
Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. What I'm talking about is the opportunity that every child should have, no matter where you're at, no matter what the color of your skin is, what your sex is, or what your income is. No one should have to worry about that. And so school choice to me means right-sizing the budget in public education, meaning that these school budgets are so large, no one wants to give up that amount of power. Right. No one does. But just because it's a thing that we've let ride for so long doesn't mean we should continue to do that. So here's what I would offer back to anybody who is willing to listen to me. I would offer a couple of different things. Number one, schools should fight. They should compete for the opportunity
yes.
to teach your child. Number two, any parent who walks into a school today and says, you work for me, the problem is they don't. And let me be clear about that. They don't. Your taxes go into a general budget. That general budget then is decided by a bunch of politicians down in Richmond and on Capitol Hill, and they decide where that money goes, how it's spent, and what strings, most importantly, what strings are attached to it. And so if you want that money, you answer to the guy whose district your school is in, because he's going to be the one to fight for that budget. And so I'm talking about changing that dynamic totally. Will public schools shrink? Absolutely. Should they? I think so. My wife was a public school teacher, and in one classroom, she taught over 35 kids. The administrators had fired teachers so that they could hire more administrators to deal with the amount of kids that they had. How many principals do you have? 4. How many do you need? Right? Right? Like, man. Think, we had, in my high school, we had a principal and a vice principal, and the vice principal was either a teacher or a coach. You did something else.
That's right.
That was not your full-time job. And so when she approached them, she was reprimanded, and this is why she left public education after the birth of our first child. When she approached them and said, I've got too many kids in my classroom, how do we deal with this? They said, well, put some chairs on the outside of the wall and let the children rotate and take turns using the desk. And then she got reprimanded. So she was like, I can't do this. I can't put all of my soul and heart and effort into this only to watch everything that I'm doing being done by people who have no job being in a classroom. So that's one, universal school choice. Don't let me go too far down the rabbit hole on these, okay? Number two, farming families, and agriculture. That's one really big button issue that no one likes to talk about. Agriculture is the biggest industry in Virginia with a billion dollars, but no one talks about it. And no one invests in it. Everyone's work in Warren County right now. You guys are fighting the fight of your lives about data centers. We fought for it when I lived over in Fauquier County. We're fighting it in Frederick County. You're fighting it here in Warren County. Why? Because they've run out of space, right, in Prince William County. And Loudoun don't want them because that's where all the uppies live.
They already have enough.
They already got enough, right? And so now it's making its way farther out westward. But I would argue this point. If Virginia's largest industry is agriculture, why are we not investing more into that? That also includes infrastructure, making sure that our farmers across the state can get their goods to a market somewhere and keep our economy rolling. So that's number two. Number three, I have a personal vendetta against the personal property tax. So you'll see in my book what I've said is I want to eliminate Virginia's personal property tax. So again, this is one of those things where you should push back on me. So I'll push back on myself before you get to. So a lot of people say, well, how are you going to make up the tax, right? Because that funds something. It provides a resource somewhere. So two things. Number one, I would argue that just because a tax exists does not necessarily mean that that tax should exist. Number one. Number two, use income tax as an example. The income tax that we all pay right now, you think the government deserves that? Do you?
Not necessarily, no.
All right, good. We're on the same page. All right. But that tax was created out of a necessity of a world war. We were all told the world was about to end. And so income tax. But it'll be done. Once the world war is over, it'll be done. It never went away. And as a matter of fact, it is nothing but increased over time. So what I'm trying to say is, I think that we need to drastically relook at how we as Americans or individual citizens think about taxes. And I think we need to start holding government accountable and saying that you need to shrink. I've not asked you to do all of these things. Exactly. I've not asked you to grow outside of these bounds. Ronald Reagan said it best, and Lord help me for invoking the name of Ronald Reagan in a political discussion, but here we go. Ronald Reagan said it best. Things are best solved at the lowest possible level. I would take that a step further. At the family, at the community level, things are best solved, right? And so I think what we ought to be doing is trying to focus on de-shackling ourselves from the biggest parts of government, the federal government, the state government, even down to the county government. And we ought to be talking about what we can do and where our taxes should be going and the services that we actually want versus what we're getting. Because I would argue that if you take the amount of personal property tax collected in counties and localities across the state of Virginia and you drive down my road, you'll hit more potholes than I've ever paid in taxes.
Exactly.
There's a problem.
Right.
And I don't think that we're doing enough to address that problem. And I know that that makes people on both sides of the aisle mad. But again, I'll go back to this. Just because we've allowed something to happen, just because we've allowed the government to do something over time, does not make it right. So we need to start looking at better solutions. Right. And I would also argue that that I think that there are two things that we could do right now today on day one to eliminate the personal property tax. Number one, the county ought to be able to write you a check for what they say your vehicle is worth or readjust it based on a new assessment. They tell you your vehicle is worth $200,000, great, cut me a check. Right? The assessments on these things are wild.
Right. Well, I even mentioned it to the Commissioner of Revenue. I said, they use that NADA book. I said, you realize that's written by the automobile industry. Yeah. I mean, it's only to their advantage to make the prices as high as possible.
Yeah, well, and then the other...
had no answer for that.
Yeah, well, and the other thing, too, is... So what's funny to me is, so you go and you do your value online, right? And when you're selling your car, you always want to look at what's the most value that you get, and that's what the county looks at. You go and trade that into the dealer tomorrow, and they're going to swing all the way to what's the lowest.
Less.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sorry, man, we just can't do that. So number one, cut me a check for what you think it's worth, or reevaluate.
That's like your real estate, your property.
If you think it's worth that much, that's a real asset.
Sure.
Maybe the state should be involved in car sales.
Yeah. Maybe.
Number two, over a 5-year period, I think that we can phase out and eliminate the personal property tax. That means you get time to right-size your budget. That means you get time to make up those resources or rethink them and make those taxes up from other places. Put the tax burden on people that are not from this county or not from this state, instead of making it impossible for the residents here to live here.
Right.
All right. Sorry. Those are my rabbit holes.
Well, I know that the public has a real pushback on that personal property tax because, I bought my car for $40,000. I paid the sales tax on it.
Yeah.
Next year, all of a sudden, this year, my car's worth $43,000, and I'm paying personal property tax, and it just goes crazy. And people say, "Well, I pay more in tax on the car than I paid for it."
Yeah, and it's not a fair tax at all. And here's why. Number one, because during the pandemic, the General Assembly punted the ball, and they said that localities and counties can adjust inflation how they see fit. What a crock! I mean, holy cow! You can just make up a number, and that's what some of these these counties and localities did. Not all of them, and I would say in the first district, we've done a really good job of maintaining those levels and not running wild with it. But number two, I would also say that we're penalizing, especially our younger citizens. When I was 18, I joined the military. Now, I'm the exception, not the rule, because I was raised on an onion farm by my granddaddy who never drove a flashy car in his life. But those young folks, they save up for their first car, right? Now, don't get me wrong. As soon as they see that tax bill, I think we've taught them a great lesson about the role of government. Yeah. It's awful. I think we've taught them a great lesson.
Even on your clunker.
Yeah. But what happens is you go and you buy... Let's say children, grandchildren?
I have both.
Okay. Let's say your daughter turned 16 and you decided to be an amazing dad and you went out and bought her a brand new car. You got a great deal on it because you know why? New car deals, they're having such a hard time selling them. Boom. You can walk right out the door with it. You've now penalized your daughter because she can't afford the personal property tax. So it's not a fair tax. It's not tied to any real estimate, and it's not tied to any real value. So no, it's a wrong tax all around. Right. Yeah, get rid of it. I don't know why more people aren't talking about it.
Well, a state can operate with no income tax.
I think that this state could. I think a state could operate with no income tax.
And I hear rumors that that's on the table.
I've heard those rumors. I don't think it's on the table because I've also heard the rumor that getting rid of the personal property tax was on the table before, and it didn't go away. I've also heard the rumor that deshackling ourselves from the state, controlling the alcohol, the alcohol board, the ABC board, was on the table, and that hasn't happened because of all the money that's tied up into this stuff. It's a lot of money. The more money you control, the more power you have. Everybody knows that. But I'm also one of those. I don't drink a lot. My father was a drunk, and he was an alcoholic, and he had, treated my family and I very badly before he was murdered when I was probably around 6. Now I was adopted, and so that story ended well. Don't feel bad for me. But what I'm trying to tell you is, even as someone who doesn't partake very often in that kind of stuff, I'm a free market kind of guy, right? The state has no business having a monopoly on alcohol any more than they have business owning a monopoly on farming.
Sure.
Right? And I push back on a lot of these things because I read a quote today that I think is absolutely perfectly describes it. It was a Ron Swanson quote from Parks and Recreation. And the free market is a jungle. It's wild and beautiful wilderness. Let it be. And I feel that way. The government has spent so much time trying to manipulate and control the market that I think it's the very reason we find ourselves in a situation where we owe more debt than how many times raising the debt ceiling used to be a big deal.
Right.
And now everyone on Wall Street is telling people on Capitol Hill, you have to do it. So out of control government spending and crazy amounts of inflation. I would argue that one action of the government trying to control and manipulate markets is why we find ourselves where we do today. Right. And whether you're a Republican or Democrat, that's a true statement.
Right. They always come up with the income, the taxes and all, but they never address the spending. And I think that's true from families all the way up through the government. We need more money. We need more money. We never look at, well, what can we eliminate? Why are we spending the money that we have? Yep. I always tell people it's not how much money you make, it's how much money you keep.
So there were, I'm going to invoke another Ronald Reagan example because I love it. Ronald Reagan took a lot of flack for women's rights. And he took a lot of flack because he wasn't trying to push legislation for women's rights. Ronald Reagan was so keen on making sure that the market and that the legislation and that Americans were free that what he did was he put together an entire committee and he said, I want you to look through every law on the federal books. And I want you to look through every law on the books across the 50 states. I want you to give me a recommendation on all federal laws that exist. We'll provide that to Congress and we'll strike those laws down. I want you to give me recommendations on states' laws. We'll provide those recommendations back to their governors and encourage them to strike those laws down. What Ronald Reagan was trying to do was say, the government shouldn't be in charge of policing these things. We should be as free as we claim that we are. And so I would argue that we should be doing those same things right now. There's one thing that I love that I wish we would do more of. I think that we should have a balanced budget, if not every year, every 2 years. And with that balanced budget, every program and every agency that exists in the state government ought to have to come before the General Assembly and justify their existence and their reason for being in the budget. The way the budget works right now is you build the budget based on last year's budget and it only grows. I don't have to tell you how it works, right? The problem with that is you never reduce spending anywhere. And people will say, oh, well, that's paid for. Well, that's just because they took money from one place and they recolored it and made it somewhere else.
Right.
So yeah, we got a lot of work to do, and there are a lot of quick victories and wins that can be made right now. So yeah, I'm really excited about getting in there and getting my hands dirty, because I think if we can start showing the public that they have a role in government, get them involved and showing back up and demanding these things versus kind of throwing their hands up and saying that's just the way it's always been, I think we'll have a much better state than we do right now.
That's great. So what are you going to do first day? How are you going to accomplish these tasks? Because I'm just wondering, we always say, I'm going to fight for you. How are you going to do that?
Yeah, so this is where it gets a little treacherous for me, but I'm going to say the things that are unpopular. So I'm going to write my bills. And you do that with the Department of Legislative Services, right? Because you have to figure out what exists today, what it conflicts with, and then also how it affects the budget. So I'm going to write my bills with the help of people that I think know those issues and know the budget. In the Air Force, I worked for the National Security Agency. I was an intel guy. And I would tell people all the time, I'm not your technical subject matter expert, but I know everything about your subject and all the other subjects that relate to it. So I'll lean on the expert, and then we'll put it all together and we'll go make a plan. And that's the plan we would brief to the policymaker or the decision maker. And so politics, legislation, policy works that same way. So we'll write our bills, we'll submit them to the appropriate committees, and we'll defend them like crazy. And then when they die in those committees, because universal school choice was already killed,
exactly.
Right? As an example. Personal property tax elimination was already killed. So when those things get killed, you have the opportunity to go back out to the floor and demand a vote on the floor for those bills. And that's what we're going to do. I've requested 2 terms in the Senate without pay. And the reason for that is if by 2 terms I haven't gotten those things passed, I never promised anyone that I would pass them. But what I'm promising you is if by 2 terms I haven't passed them, you'll know who to blame.
Yeah, that's what I always say. Why don't they vote on it? Because then you know. I heard something real quick, like this last thing that came before the president, and they said, well, I thought he was going to veto it. But they voted on it knowing so they could go back to their constituent. Well, I voted on it, so it's not my fault it didn't happen. Then when it did happen, it backfired on them. So
yes.
They don't like to put their name on things.
Yeah, so that's
the politics side.
Yes,
of things.
That's another big problem that we have right now. Is so a lot of what happens with these kind of discussions is, and forgive me, for going down this rabbit hole. I'll try to be brief, and I'll try not to offend too many people. what happens around these conversations is there are a lot of different things. So you'll have people that say, well, you know, the Democrat-controlled Senate won't let us pass it, so we got to water down school choice. That was the argument this time around. All right, well, we watered down school choice, and they still didn't pass it. So why didn't we just vote for universal school choice? Why didn't we push the limits and show parents that we're willing to step up and fight for it? The problem with that is you've got delegates and senators that live in, you know, very narrow districts. So then there has to be a conversation about, well, we don't want so-and-so to have to vote for this because then it'll hurt them in their district and we need to keep that seat. Let me make an argument that I've always wanted to make, and hopefully someone out there will hear me and let the argument be. We've allowed the system to grow into what it is. We've allowed the system to corrupt the people that we send there. How many times have you seen someone, even with good intent? Now, you don't know me, but let's say we knew each other, we go way back. I go to Richmond, I spend 2 terms there, and then I start running again. And I've never voted on anything, and none of my bills have ever made it. But you know I was a good guy because you knew me. We've allowed the system to grow, and we've allowed the system to corrupt. I'm not saying that everyone goes there with the intent. I'm just saying that's the way that it is. So I would argue that what we need are some people who are willing to not get anything done in the name of breaking the system. I'm willing to let people vote against my bills as long as they vote against them. I'm willing to put my name out on the slate and say, I'm the one pushing this, I'm the problem. So if the people of Virginia don't want universal school choice, if they want to keep paying the personal property tax, I was the problem senator. I submitted the bill, so next term you should vote me out. And let them do that.
That's the way it should be done.
But there are so many people that are worried about their nameplate on that office or their fancy title or that fancy tag they get on the back of their car, that they are unwilling to do that.
I agree. Well, we said a lot.
Yes.
What's coming up here in the near future where people can come and meet you and have a one-on-one conversation with you, or at least hear you speak again?
Yep, so we've actually got meet and greets every weekend up until April the 15th. A lot of those meet and greets are at private residences this time around. We did a lot of public things last year. This time we're doing a lot more private things, at least for the next month. Okay. So look on the Facebook page or go to our website, lanceforva.com or Lance Allen for Virginia on Facebook. We post those there. You can RSVP directly to my email, lance@lanceforva.com. Obviously, there are other people that check it, but most of the time you'll get me. Or if you want me, then one of my staff will make sure that I take a look at it. So, yeah, lots of things coming up. I'm really excited about it. And, yeah.
That's what you do.
That's right.
Well, you got to at least hit the run between now and June because we'll have a few extra people on the ballot. Any idea what kind of election it's going to be at this point?
Oh, you mean nomination method?
Yeah, yeah.
So the committee that decides what our race is going to be has already decided and published. So it will be a state-run primary on June the 20th, which I support. And for anyone wondering, the reason why I support that this time around is because you have Senate race, you have multiple delegate races, and then your counties and localities all have multiple races, Board of Supervisors, school board. You got a lot. And so what we're asking people is, you got to come out and vote for all of those. If every committee decides to do a state-run primary, you have to come out once and you get to vote for everything. If we let the individual parties or committees handle that, number one, it has to be on different days. Number two, it has to be at different locations. And number three, they have to pay for it. So this is actually a great way to get as many people out to vote in these elections as possible because there's going to be a lot of them. And I think that we should expect a lot of churn, a lot of overturn, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Lance, it was nice talking to you. I'm sure we could go on and on and on.
We could, yes.
But we'll do it again between now and June.
I look forward to it.
We'll see how things have percolated itself up and things maybe changed a little bit and see what it's all about.
All right, I appreciate the opportunity.
It's a lot of work. Trust me, I know. It's a lot of work running for an office, and it can be very frustrating, but the rewards will be worth it, I think, and especially when you get out there working for the people. I think that energy will keep going. Your wife will push you. You know what they say, behind every successful man is a woman pushing him. So we're going to blame it on your wife.
Well, any success I have, you're more than welcome to blame on my wife. She deserves it.
Yeah, thanks
you.
again, Lance.